Welcome everyone to the L7C podcast. Today we have a very special episode for you guys for the first time in a long time. The number one podcast of all time goer, queen of the L7C, Miss Chelsea Myers is here with us today. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. Glad to be back. It's been a long time.
It,
When you go to Europe for 4 months, time just flies. And so I'm glad to be back.
I know it has been a very long time. Last time you were on the when NIL first started, you were on that with Sarah and Byron, and then like single episode wise, it's been ages.
Yeah.
But the world didn't stop. There's a lot of things that have happened, especially in the world of women's sports. So we're just going to dive into all of the different things that have happened and get your thoughts and opinions on them. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
First, we're entering 2000. We're already in 2024. 2023 ended. How did you feel, just broad generalization of like how sports were portrayed, like from the women's side, like viewership, all of that stuff and
I mean,
interest?
yeah, certainly, we've seen a lot of progress. I think 2023 was really the year of women's sports. But I think there's always room for improvement. One of the things I think is really important when we look at women's sports in particular is that, there are people out there that say people don't care about women's sports. And I think 2023 has truly proved that that's not the case. People do care about women's sports. And we definitely saw what happens when you make women's sports accessible, whether it's ABC or putting games on CBS, whatever that looks like. That age old saying of if you build it, they will come. And I think women's sports from the last year in particular has really shown that. And some things I've seen like on Twitter and just from people talking about women's sports, a lot of people have said yesterday was the day to invest in women's sports. And I think that's a really good statement because all women's sports can continue to do is grow. And I think we're going to see that in through 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, because just in 2023, like from Forbes, the media coverage for women's sports nearly tripled in these past 5 years. And I think with the thing that you said, obviously with social media getting bigger and bigger and that being an avenue for people seeing like, oh, people do care about like women's soccer or women's basketball and that propelling the big corporations to be like, all right, well, this is gaining traction on the algorithm. Maybe we should invest in it. I just feel like too that especially 2023, there was a lot of stories that were portrayed on ESPN, stuff like that. Obviously, the women's college basketball with Clark and South Carolina and Angel Reese and all of that. The U.S. women's national team is always going to be in the news. Obviously, Simone Biles. Like, I felt like there's just a lot of good stories that were actually portrayed for the mainstream media.
Yeah, and I would say, obviously those good stories are great, but I think for every one good story, you still see the media focusing on three bad stories, or
Mhm.
focusing on the things that aren't going well in women's sports. And I think that's something that needs to change. Certainly, I think that has changed to some degree. And like ESPN and some of your bigger networks are starting to really focus on women's sport and put it on the pedestal that I think it should be. But I do think that there still is progress to be made in terms of how we look at women's sports from a positive, negative perspective. Because, I think it's important when bad things happen that you report about them, that you talk about them, you learn from them. But when that a lot of times is the reason why women's sports are in the media, I think that's problematic. And so, really focusing on what can we pull from women's sports that's positive. I think that should be a focus for a lot of networks moving forward and not fully focusing or solely focusing on, the juicy or negative stories that come out of women's sports.
What would be some negative stories that you've seen in the end of 2023 to the beginning of 2024 in regards to women's sports?
I think there was a report or a study that was done about the US women's national team and the amount
Hmm.
of abuse, or really the World Cup in general. So all of the teams, and the amount of online abuse that they received. And I think that, is important that that was brought to light, but it just goes to show how much negativity those players experience. And I think part of that is with the US women's national team in particular, their fight for equal pay, their strong stance on certain issues. Megan Rapinoe is a good example of that. Their desire to fight for basic human rights. And there are groups of people out there that don't appreciate that. And they don't appreciate their willingness to fight for other women. And so, you saw a lot of that. And I think there are even some media folks out there that don't help, namely Alexi Lawless, or as I like to call him, Alexi Lamas, and Carly Lloyd. She was added to commentary for the Women's World Cup this year,
Hmm.
and she made some, really terrible comments about the culture and they don't have a winning mentality and that they didn't want to be there and the players are more focused on, getting endorsements and different things. And the reality is women's soccer in particular, not the most lucrative sport. So certainly those women have to find a way to make money outside of playing in the NWSL or getting their national team salary. So yeah, of course they're gonna find other opportunities. But I think, calling into question their mentality is so far out of left field. It's unreal. And so, you know, Carly Lloyd has done some good things for the national team. But over the years, I think she's really cemented herself as unlikable and somebody who just wants to cause drama and blame people when in reality, I think she needs to look at herself a little bit. She likes to make controversial comments. And then when people call her out, she likes to block people and she doesn't take responsibility for that. And so, as much as she has been a part of the US women's national team identity, I think, a lot of the women's soccer community would like to see her just kind of melt away and just be silent and go on with her life. But she just wants to be talked about. She wants to be a part of that. And, Fox Sports is going to employ her for as long as she wants to be employed because of, her ability to kind of work with Alexi Lawless and be that kind of controversial person in sport or in soccer in particular. So, I don't like to talk badly about people, but I think that's something that she's kind of made it really hard not to. So I know that's kind of a rant a little bit, but that's one of the things I think from a US soccer perspective that they kind of have an issue in the media that certainly needs to be addressed.
So to stay on the U.S. soccer team, split it into two from the sports aspect and then the Carly Lloyd aspect. Sports aspect, they did play in the World Cup this past year, and for the first time in 5 billion years, they did not win nor get to the championship round or anything of that nature. So, strictly from the sport aspect, what do they need to do, or what did you see that caused concerns for you, and what do they need to do for the future to not exit as early as they're not used to exiting?
Yeah, I do think a little bit that the team had a bit of an identity crisis. They really didn't know who they were, and I think that is largely due to coaching. When Vlatko first started, the team was really energized.
Mhm.
They were winning a lot. They looked good. But then something suddenly, kind of the creativity just kind of dropped off. The tactics weren't there. Something just was not complete. And I think part of that is holding on to veterans, right? Your Alex Morgans, your Megan Rapinoes,
Mhm.
some of those players, they're iconic and I love them and they've been great for the team. But you also have to wonder, was it the right decision to bring them on the roster? Love Megan Rapinoe. She did not have a good World Cup,
Yeah.
period. I give her a lot of credit. She understood her role. She understood that she was going to be coming off the bench. She was going to be kind of that super sub. Not that that really came to fruition, so to speak, but I give her a lot of credit because she knew she wasn't going to be in that starting 11. There have been other players in the past who have not taken to that idea so kindly, aka Carly Lloyd. And so I think her ability to compartmentalize and do that was a big thing. However, I think maybe there should have been a question about whether or not they truly should have been on the roster. I know when it comes to a World Cup, you do want some of that veteran presence, but you have people like Crystal Dunn. You have Becky Sauerbrunn would have been on the roster. She was hurt. She's a big veteran presence. Alex Morgan just hasn't been super productive. You have Alyssa Nair. She's a veteran. Even Rose Lavelle, Lindsey Horan, they're young players, but they're veterans. And so you had a lot of that veteran presence. And I think that they should have done a better job of bringing in newer players, or leading up to the World Cup should have done a better job of building that chemistry. Blackco liked to mix up the rosters,
Hmm.
through friendlies, through those international windows, and there just wasn't any continuity. I think that was one of the big things. The other thing that was a major issue at the World Cup was the lack of subs. There was literally no rotation in those group stage games. Players that I thought would play a healthy amount got no minutes. And that to me is incredibly problematic. I don't know what that says about the players or the coaching. I don't know. You have someone like Alana Cook who has been playing really well with Naomi Girma, didn't see a minute of the field. You have Christy Mewis, whose first touch was a PK against Sweden. Like, that is insane to me. You have 22 players that are the best in the world, and you went with your best maybe 13 in terms of how much rotation you did. And to me, that just is not a recipe for success. If you haven't, I would definitely watch the Netflix documentary about the women's national team. It was, if you watch the World Cup, if you know women's soccer, you don't necessarily learn anything new, but I think some of the insight from the players that they followed and they talked with was really, really cool. So you get some of that behind the scenes. But if you're somebody who didn't watch the World Cup, I think it would be incredibly enlightening. And you're gonna see that I don't think mentality was the issue. I think there were a lot more issues with coaching and tactics and lack of rotation than these players not having the will or to desire to win. So, there's a lot of haters out there, and a lot of people who, are maybe saying that the women's national team is done for, and I don't think that's true. I'm really excited about their coaching change, their new hire. So the manager of Chelsea women's team has agreed to be the women's national team coach. She's great. She's won a lot of championships for Chelsea women, and there are a lot of players that speak very highly of her. So I'm really excited. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the next 6 months with the Olympics, because she technically is not taking over until the end of the WSL season, so the English season. So there's going to be very little time for her to get integrated with the players. She has met the players. She's been to camp once, but she won't coach any lead up games until the Olympics. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. But I think she has potential to make some serious change, and we're going to see a new wave of players, and we're going to get some players back from injury. We have Mal Swanson, who didn't play in the World Cup due to injury. You have Kat Macario, who didn't play. Mia Fishel wasn't even looked at for the Women's World Cup roster. She's been playing lights out. So there's a lot of opportunity and new blood that's going to come in that I think will make a huge difference for that team for the Olympics and beyond.
So, three questions from that perspective, still on the sports side before we go to Carly's side. So, with the veterans and all that stuff, obviously Megan is done. Alex is going to come back, or she done or is it on the fence?
I think she's on the fence. I think she's, going to be in the mix of players as a potential for that roster for the Olympics. I think the Olympics would probably be her last like major tournament,
Okay.
but I don't know. I guess it depends on how she's feeling, how she's playing. But if I were to predict if she makes the Olympic roster, I think that would be her last, major tournament. But who knows? Like I said, there's a lot of talent, and so I think it's going to be hard for her to make that roster, because we're really deep at the striker position.
So let's just say all the old veterans, they're gone. So then going and even past the Olympics, so just going projecting into the World Cup. So then who would you say then by the time it is the World Cup, who would be the next three or four main leaders of the team, and also the next three or four people that the casual soccer fan would gravitate towards? Because you know everyone on the team. Like you just named a whole bunch of people on the team. You named people who were hurt, people who might make the team. But for the people who just tune in for the World Cup in the next couple of years, who are going to be those players that the casual fan's going to be able to gravitate towards, saying like, "Oh, I'm watching because this is just media cliche. This is the new Megan Rapinoe of the team. This is the new Alex Morgan of the team. This is the reincarnation of Mia Hamm," like stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the front three that are going to be kind of the household names are Mal Swanson, um, Trinity Rodman, and Sophia Smith. I
Mhm.
think those three in particular are going to be an absolute force. And you started to see this before Mal Swanson got hurt leading up to the World Cup. So, and before Mal Swanson got hurt, she was unstoppable. So I would expect her to come back and kind of continue that pace. She actually just signed a record deal with the Chicago Red Stars.
So
She Yeah, $2 million over 5 years, I think something
mhm.
along those lines. She's now the highest paid player in the NWSL, so think that speaks volumes. From a defensive perspective, Naomi Girma certainly is one to watch. She just won U.S. Player of the Year from U.S. Soccer. She has been phenomenal. I don't know how she didn't make the best 11 team. Um, it's crazy. Just that whole award system is kind of a joke. That's a conversation for a different day. But Naomi Girma is certainly, I think she is poised to become kind of the next captain and next leader of that team. So I think those four are some really big names. And then of course you have Rose Lavelle, Lindsey Horan. Those two players will be around for a while as well. But I don't know. It's going to be hard. The Olympic roster is smaller than a World Cup roster, so
Mhm.
there's going to be some broken hearts for sure. But yeah, I think, look to them to get back for 2027 in particular. And I do have to say, and I think this is important to note, that women's soccer is just getting better. It
That was my other question I was going to ask about, like when you talked about the haters saying the U.S. women have fallen off. Is it really more that, or is it more that the rest of the world is getting better as well?
Yeah, and I think it's a combination of both of those things, right? I think, if you listen to me rant for a little while, the development system in the United States and as far as
Hmm.
soccer goes, it's just not great. Um, and so I think there is some of that idea of we just kind of are complacent a little bit because we have been so dominant in the past.
Hmm.
But I certainly believe that it's because more and more countries are heavily investing in their women's soccer programs.
Hmm.
And so they are raising their level. There is more exposure. There are more big names that are coming out of different countries. People are playing all over the world in so many different leagues that yeah, it's becoming harder and harder for the US team to be that dominant. And I think that's fantastic. I think that is amazing because that means more competitive World Cups. That means that you don't necessarily know who's going to win. As a fan, that's a double-edged sword, right? Because
Hmm.
you expect to win and you want to win, and expectations are so high, but at the same time, you want games to be competitive. You want teams to have that opportunity. And we saw that in this World Cup. There were teams that were some dark horses that came out and made the came out of the group stage. And that's great. And we're seeing that more and more money and opportunities to make money are happening as a result. FIFA needs to continue to get on board and invest more. But I do think that it's really great for the game of soccer.
I would also throw the fact too that like a lot of these women across the world who obviously they love soccer, they're playing soccer. They've watched all these USA women be dominant for the past 20 years, really. So it's like, and then when you play against the US women's team, you're playing probably against your favorite player. Like, so you're already amped up for that. And you're like, you're playing against the team that's been so dominant for the past 2, 3 decades that it's like USA is always getting another team's best shot, especially the USA women's team. So it's like, now that they know that and they've known it, but now it's like they're the reason that everyone in the world is getting better. So,
Yeah,
like you
and
said,
I would,
double edged sword there because you want your team to win, but you're happy that competition's getting better.
yeah, and I would equate that to similar situations like Serena Williams and Simone Biles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Simone is competing against gymnasts who were 5, 6, 7 years old, idolizing her, and now
Mm-hmm.
they're teammates and could make the national team together. And I think, that's just incredible for women's sports in general that there is that sort of parity and that ability to have those role models, but also how great is it to beat somebody that you've looked up to,
Yep.
right? You've met that expectation and now you're exceeding it. And that's something that truly I think is maybe a little bit unique to women's sports, right? I don't feel like we talk about men's sports in the same way as we do women's sports. And I don't know if that's due to longevity of women's sports or what it is, but yeah, certainly those expectations and that desire to exceed and surpass some of the greats is something that I think is really cool for soccer and other sports as well.
So then on the other side, Miss Lloyd, who obviously played on this team, won championships with this team, and has now she works as an analyst for Fox Sports, right? And she's had her comments about the team. People have commented back about her stuff. I see that her most recent thing that she talked about was her quote was the way you silence your critics is by your performance. So my thing with her, obviously she played with a lot of these women. Is it more her going into that sports talking persona that you need to have to succeed now in that field? Or did she have like any valid points about the team, or was she just being way too controversial?
Well, I do want to put some context to that quote. So that quote in particular was in response to that study I talked about earlier with
Mm-hmm.
the abuse. And so I think there's an important distinction to make here because regardless if the US women's national team had won the World Cup, they would have still been victims of that same abuse. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
look at that report, it's homophobia, it's racism, it's transphobia, some of those other you know, isms, right, that we talk about or see. And so I don't think winning the World Cup would have changed that. They would have still received that same abuse because people don't agree with their politics or their stances, right? And Fox Sports, I think to some degree, kind of perpetuates that or allows people to say these things because they open themselves up by having comments from Carla Lloyd or Alexi Lawless like they do. So I don't necessarily agree with her in the sense of the context of that quote. Certainly, you can silence your haters by going out and winning. Yes, I think that's true. But I think in the context of that article and what she was replying to, I don't think it fits because she was simply saying that regardless of what was said and what was being spewed at these players, it wouldn't have mattered if they had won. And I think it absolutely does matter one way or another. So yeah, I think that quote certainly needs the context behind it. But I would say, yeah, Carly is there to be controversial. Does she make good points? I think so, sometimes. But I also think she really does lean into this idea of being controversial. And what I find really ironic is before she retired, when she was in the NWSL, she didn't play in certain games because she went on a book tour. So she had written a book and she went on and was doing meet and greets and different things with people. So tell me how you weren't focusing on your brand and your endorsement deals and making money, and now you're going to come over here and say that the current players are focused too much on that. I think that to me is really ironic and hypocritical. So, again, there have been a lot of things in recent years that I just haven't agreed with. But again, I am not one to say that she's not a great player. She is. And there are a lot of games that were won because of her being a great player. But I think it's more than just being a great player. You also need to be a good human being. And in a lot of aspects, she hasn't been. And that's just my personal opinion. You may really like Carly Lloyd, and that's fine. But I think there are a lot of things out there that have shown me that I like the player Carly Lloyd, but not necessarily the person Carly Lloyd. And that's just kind of how it is, and from my perspective.
So that report that you talked about, was that by who wrote that report that Carly was talking about?
Oh, I don't remember.
Well, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because of the of that quote I said, and then you saying if they didn't, like, even if they did win, like the stuff would still come up. Like, did that stuff come up through the report, or did that come up through critics about the racism, trans, like all that stuff?
So it was done by FIFA and FIFA Pro.
Okay.
And so they looked specifically at online abuse and
Mm-hmm.
hate speech directed at players during the 2023 tournament.
Okay. That makes
So,
some
and
sense.
yeah, and 1 in 5 players were targeted online. And it's not just the US women. They looked at all of the teams that participated. So, the US women received the most, unsurprisingly.
Wow.
But yeah, it was just really crazy and not necessarily surprising to see, but when you put it in that perspective and you put it on a graphic and you say this is what they're dealing with, yeah, I mean, that's got to be tough for them. I'm sure they're not focusing too much on social media while they're over there, but players are human. They read those things, they have feelings, they take those things to heart. And so it's really easy to get behind a keyboard and type, 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 and just spew whatever you want. But at the end of the day, you wouldn't want somebody to do that to you. So why are you doing that to a complete stranger? And I know we've talked about that. It's because they feel comfortable doing it and they know nothing's going to happen to them. But it's really unfair whether you like the person or not, you agree with the person or not. It's just not a healthy way to portray yourself or your feelings, because you wouldn't say some of those things to people's faces. And if you are, well, if you would, I guess more power to you, but it still doesn't make you a good human being. I mean, it was just really eye-opening to see all of that come out.
My only question with that survey, to Carly's, I'm not saying her defense, but to her point, that I would have wanted to see that survey, like the statistics in a year that the U.S. women won the World Cup. That'd be my only thing, because when you said the winning thing, I for listening context, because men's sports wise, I mean, you hear the thing, winning cures all things. Like, you could be a terrible human being, you can be charged for 22 sexual assault, whatever, and still get paid 340 million fully guaranteed. So that was the only thing I was just thinking, the fact that, like, I don't feel like that is the same for any
And
woman athlete.
I would say it part of it is there was a major shift from, so if you look at the 2015 winning team
Mm-hmm.
compared to 2019 and 2023,
Mm-hmm.
from 2015 to 2023, In 2019, this was kind of going on, but there was a very distinct shift in the way that the players acted or spoke out about certain things.
Yeah.
Um, Megan Rapinoe was the first non-black athlete to kneel for the national anthem, and she received a ton of backlash for that.
Hmm.
And Carly Lloyd has been, publicly has stated that she thought that that was a distraction and that she wouldn't do it and all of these things. So I think it would be interesting to see the difference from 2015, 2019, and 2023, because 2015, I would suspect that the amount of abuse would be quite low. And
Was
I
Hope
think
Solo still on that team? Or is she
2015,
out?
yes, she
Okay.
was. And I think that would be true whether or not they had won. 2019 might have been kind of the uptick of some of that abuse, but I think equal pay and them just being more outspoken really was the catalyst for what they received in 2023. I mean, Megan Rapinoe specifically said in 2019 she would not go to the White House if
Yeah.
invited because of
Yeah.
who, yeah. And so I think that pissed a lot of people off, for lack of a better term, right? And so that just continued to permeate and, kind of stew through to 2023. And I think part of it too is they weren't as dominant. So they didn't have this kind of shield that said, hey, we're the best in the world and there's nothing you can do about it, because there was kind of that decline in their performance. And so I think that also opened them up um, to kind of this additional hatred, whether that's right or wrong, or, losing is a reason to be hateful to somebody. I don't think it is, but, that's probably a lot of the mindset, is that shield and that barrier for success just wasn't there anymore.
It's not. Losing's not. I would also don't want to typecast or stereotype the people who would do that stuff, but the same people who, quote unquote, may have been praying for the US women's downfall so they could really just unload on all that stuff are usually, again, not typecasting them, are the same people that if the USA team would have won, they would have been like, oh, USA, USA, US. Like, we don't lose to anybody. But, like, so you're playing two sides of the wrong coin there. So I don't understand how you can want a USA team to go undefeated in anything in every sport on planet Earth. But then when they do lose, you're just like, oh, it's because they were trying to get more money, or it's because Megan has blue hair, or it's because this person's gay, or this person's non-binary. Like, I just, they're playing two sides of the wrong coin there.
No, totally agree.
So don't know that. Can't wait to see with the Olympics. Which, speaking of the Olympics in Paris this year, it's going to be a great time. First time ever gender equality. There's going to be 50% of the people there that are going to be women. This Reddit article has been like over 100-year thing, but that is good.
Yeah, I actually was really surprised when I read that it hasn't been equal in terms of the breakdown. But I thought that there were more female athletes in some games, but obviously that's not the case. But the IOC has made gender equity and parity a
Hmm.
big part of their mission and their charter. So I give them a lot of credit for making some of those adjustments and trying to slowly make progress towards that. And so it's great to see that in 2024, that is an actual legitimate reality that we'll see. I'm curious if it's parity in terms of the number of sports being offered or simply the number of athletes, because you have things like field hockey is generally
Hmm.
just for women, and I don't know if that's an Olympic sport, but you have some of those things that are only women's sports versus predominantly male sports. So I'm just interested to see maybe if they're expanding like roster sizes or anything to kind of get to that parity. But either way, I think that's you can't go wrong by making things equal and equitable for all of the athletes that are involved.
Some things are trying to become equal. Some things are trying to go backwards and stay the same. Pretty sure if you listen to any sports, anything, or if you scroll on anything, you probably know this show, The Outkick, and the podcast with Mr. Clay Travis pops up on everyone's timeline here and then. So this age-old thing, which is kind of got annoying. Obviously, Las Vegas Aces, WNBA team, and back-to-back champs. Clay offered them $1 million, and this is at the end of 2023 when this happened, if they could beat a boys high school state championship team in a one game contest. So, Chelsea, this stuff is old stuff. It's been, people have talked about this stuff before, obviously, but I don't, one, these type of things never happen. Like they're never going to play, but I don't understand why these become talking points of a professional team playing against a high school team. And just because the professional team is the women's team, a lot of people really think the high school team would smoke the professional team, which I think is kind of crazy. But what
Well,
do
I
you?
mean, this all started with the women's national team and this whole rumor about U15 team beating them. If you talk to any of the players that were there, yes, they did train with a U15 boys team, but they were just messing around. It wasn't a legitimate scrimmage. It was just them kind of having some fun at the end of practice. So that's where all of this stemmed from. And then, yeah, the Las Vegas Aces and this whole thing. Like, I don't understand why men think that just because it's a woman that they inherently are better than them. Like, so I saw a TikTok the other day of a track runner who was doing a workout and some guy challenged her to a 400-meter race. Apparently he brought his parents and his friends to watch this race. He's not a runner. He's not like a track athlete, nothing. And so he challenges this girl to run a 400. So she says, okay, whatever. And so they film this and her running, and she on the TikTok, she was narrating the whole thing.
Yeah, I
And
saw
so,
that.
yeah, so she basically is like, I stayed with him for 200 meters and then I just blew him out of the water. Like, I don't understand why they think that somebody who trains and does this for a living is not going to be good at what they do. A male 400 runner, okay, probably going to be better than a female 400 runner. Like it just biologically, okay, yeah. But like if you're somebody who just doesn't run, I don't know where you think that you're going to beat them. The confidence of mediocre men is just insane to me. Like just absolutely ridiculous. Serena dealt with it, right? Men saying that they could win against her, it's crazy to me. Like these are professional athletes for a reason. You've seen, some WNBA players go one on one again against men who think that they can beat them, and they smoke them every time. So a high school team is not going to beat the Aces. Like that's just not a thing. And I don't know why media think that the Aces need to prove themselves against a high school team. Like that doesn't do anybody any good. Nobody at all, ever. And so yeah, it's just annoying when these stories continue to pop up and, trying to put money and entice somebody to quote unquote take the bait is just ridiculous.
I would think one with the track one, and I do think with track and running track all through high school and all this stuff, that is the most unsexist sport you can do that stuff is because the numbers and times don't lie. They really don't. Like there was a lot of girls on like my track team who would beat most of the boys on our track and our boys team. I mean, we won states my sophomore year, but besides like the top boys on our team, they'd smoke a majority. Like the top girls on our team would smoke 98% of the rest of the boys on the varsity. Besides like that top percentage thing. So I always feel like the track when I actually enjoyed that TikTok because that is one sport you cannot. You're fast, you're fast. You're slow, you're slow. There's no boy girl like. And then the thing with coming off the street, I do think I don't know where that comes from. I truly don't, because if you think that you're just coming off your couch playing Call of Duty with your friends and you're gonna go take on a like college player, I think that's a little crazy. And even like someone like me, for example, I don't think I'm mediocre by any means, but my own self, I'm just like, if you're not as good as my brother, I probably think I could beat you. Like I do, but it's like if you went and got a scholarship for basketball, boy or girl, I'm just like, probably can't because there's a reason you got a scholarship for that. But I just feel like sometimes there needs to be a little hubris. It's just like this person got a scholarship. I did not need to just it's okay. Not saying you can't score on a person or whatnot, but it's like they are literally doing this at college for a living. And in the Aces case, they're literally at the top of the profession of their profession. And you think that some high school boys on a state championship team, which some of them may be good, some of them may go play D1. A lot of them aren't, think they're just going to come and beat them. It's absolutely ridiculous. It is a huge ego thing, which needs to be quelled a bit. And it's the fact too that Clay, who is very known, can say this stuff, and then you have millions of people agreeing. I think that's more the problem.
Yeah. And to your point, right? You think that you might be able to beat somebody, but if you went in and you played somebody and you lost, you would be like, okay, yeah, they're better than me.
Oh
Okay, fine,
yeah.
move on,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But if something like this were to happen and the boys team got beat, then people would simply say, oh, they just got lucky, or the high school team had a bad day, or officiating was terrible, something. There would be some kind of excuse that would be used to say why they won instead of simply saying, yeah, they're better. They're professionals. And so I think that's where the big difference is. Like people who can't accept, that sort of thing would simply find every excuse in the book to explain away why this happened instead of simply saying, okay, we were wrong. And yeah, they are good. And that's why they won the championship 2 years in a row and why they're some of the highest paid players in the WNBA. Like there's a reason for that. It's not just because they, you know, fart rainbows. I don't know. Like it they have some legitimate reason. And so like it's crazy to me that people question their ability because you would never do that to the highest paid player in the NBA. You would never
Mhm.
do that to the highest paid player in the NFL. Like you would recognize, yeah, if I try to go up against a 300-pound lineman, I'm probably going to get crushed, right? You're not going to say, "Oh yeah, I could definitely sack the QB." That's not happening. Like that's not realistic. So why do you not extend the same courtesy to women that are at the top of their games?
I even think the courtesy thing in this perspective, like Clay in this one didn't even say like the worst NBA team or like the best college team. He said a random high school championship team in Texas, and Texas is like its own freaking country. So it's like, oh, I can just find a random state championship team and they'll just go beat the Aces easy. Like, and that's where I'm just like, that's so disrespectful on so many different levels. And obviously those high school kids weren't asking for like this attention to like put them in the spotlight like that. So then they're getting asked the question like, oh, do you think you could beat the aces and all of that? And I mean, just from a hormonal standpoint, those 18-year-old kids are like, well, I'm not gonna look like some punk. Yeah, I think I could guard whatchamacallit on the aces. Oh, absolutely. I think I can guard Asia Wilson, all of that. It's like it just starts an unnecessary trend in a guy's brain that you don't really need.
But yeah, it's again, it goes back to this, thing media and people in the media want to be controversial and it got clicks and it got a conversation started, good, bad, or ugly. But yeah, it's ridiculous.
I mean, it got to a point where bet online, they had betting odds on who would win this game. And if you could bet real dollars on it, which is kind of crazy that he would, and then his response is like, well, if the WNBA champion wins, they get a extra $1 million and they definitely need the money, stuff like that. So I think that is wild. I will say money wise, major women's sports are going to cross the 1 billion threshold in 2024, which is good. That's fantastic. Still Ways to go, but I still think that's really good. Your favorite thing on planet Earth, the NCAA announcing their new deal. I mean, I just know you love the NCAA, the $920 million deal with ESPN, which includes the women's Final Four. Because I mean, the women's Final Four, the one that just happened, broke records. The national championship was watched by 10 million people. The semifinals, 5.5, early semifinals, 30. Like, it broke a whole bunch of records. So now they're getting some, hopefully, piece of the pie with the NCAA tournament. I know your very first podcast ages ago, they didn't even call, like, they were like, oh, the women's Final Four is just a separate Final Four. If you guys remember that one, that's when Sabrina, who's now in the WNBA, star in the WNBA, was on Oregon at the time, posting the video from their accommodations, and it was god awful. And they've upgraded, which is kind of crazy how that many years have passed since then. But hopefully, they get more of the pie, the women in the
Yeah,
NCAA.
I, I think it's progress, but at the same time, if you look at the breakdown of that deal,
Mm-hmm.
so the women's tournament kind of nets out to $65 million a year based on the deal. And so the deal includes women's basketball and then other championships that ESPN is going to get the rights to, which I think is great. I think even non-generating revenue sports should have an opportunity to be seen and experienced and all of that. What my problem is with the women's tournament, the March Madness tournament for the women, is they're valuing it at $65 million a year. However, the Kaplan report that was done basically said that the women's tournament is worth somewhere between 81 and $112 million annually. So tell me how, in the words of the kids these days, the math ain't math,
The
right?
kids these
So
days.
I know I'm 30 and now I can say that. Um, like, how do you undervalue the tournament by $30 million essentially? So while it is good and they're making progress, I think there's still some issues with it. I still think they're severely undervaluing the women's tournament. And also, I think to some degree, some other non-generating revenue sports. I think if you've seen anything related to volleyball, viewership is up for women's volleyball and NCAA. Softball, even viewership numbers
Hmm.
are up. So I think from a women's sport perspective, they're still severely undervaluing those opportunities. So it's kind of a catch-22 because yes, we're seeing an increase, but if you look at the men's tournament for March Madness, it's valued at somewhere between 900 million and 1.1 billion dollars.
Hmm.
You can't tell me that there's that big of a gap between those two tournaments. And so I think the NCAA needs to do a little bit more work in figuring out how to kind of up that valuation or getting more out of the way that women's sports are valued. And I think a lot of that starts with effort, right? They
Yep.
did the Kaplan report. It was very clear that there were discrepancies, that there were disparities, inequalities, and they vowed to make change and to make a difference. And certainly this deal I think is a step in the right direction. But again, $65 million a year versus the valuation of the men's tournament at 900 million. And I don't know if that's per year or how they're valuing that, but like that's a pretty stark difference. And so how do you kind of navigate that massive difference?
Yeah, I do. That is crazy. Like when you go through the numbers, and I also think too, if like even just this year in general, with talking to my youngest brother about college basketball, what's going on. I mean, him and I are both more interested this year in second year in a row in the women's March Madness tournament than the men's currently. I mean, obviously I'll be amped up for when the men's come, but just like this whole women's season, like I'm a season ticket holder at Ohio State's women's basketball games, and I frequent them on Sundays, and it's more exciting right now. Like they have more stars and more storylines. Obviously, like Caitlin Clark and like the LSU national championships. They have one of the greatest coaches of all time in Gino Auriemma and UConn. I just feel like they're more exciting, so they should garner that extra bit of money because once March comes around, I mean, just the way ESPN operates, they're going to be on Caitlin Clark's tail the whole way through, which is going to get them more clicks and all of that. So I agree with you that extra millions that they're just randomly disappeared should be going towards the women's tournament.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about parity in women's soccer. I think there's a lot more parity in
Yeah.
women's basketball. I mean, UConn dominated for years and years and years and years.
Hmm.
That dynasty was wild for a long time, and now that's kind of mellowed out. And teams are getting better and
Hmm.
being able to compete. Now South Carolina is kind of inching on that a little bit. They've been pretty dominant lately, but I think that's great again for the game of basketball because we are seeing more household names like your Caitlin Clarks, your Angel Reese's, Haley Van Lith, things
Hmm.
like that. Paige Beckers,
Yep.
you know, those different players. You know them by name. You know what they're doing, and what's incredible with Caitlin Clark is she's less than 300 points away from becoming or having the most points in NCAA women's basketball history, which is crazy to think about.
Hmm.
You look at the names that she's, in kind of that list with, it's pretty insane. And I think those storylines have, created a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement around women's basketball. And for whatever reason, I feel like the NCAA just doesn't want to lean into that. They're like, this is exciting, but men's sports, men's basketball, like let's focus on that instead of, focusing on where there truly is an opportunity to grow. Like people know men's March Madness, right? You know that tournament. There's really not a whole lot of growth opportunities. Yeah, you're going to continue to make $1 billion from it. Great, whatever you do, you just by being a nonprofit organization. But like, if you really want to make money, why are you not focusing on areas where you can grow and make more money? Like,
Hmm.
all you have to do is show people, like, show them the viewership numbers, show them the opportunities. I think people would jump on board in a heartbeat. Like, they're going to get a return on their investment. We're seeing more and more organizations kind of starting to cater maybe more to the female demographic in terms of fandom. We see places like the Sports Bra, which is a bar that in the Pacific Northwest that is dedicated specifically to showing women's sports. And so, we're seeing these little pockets of opportunity. And I think it just takes one really big organization to jump on board and say, yeah, we're doing this, and everyone's going to follow suit. Because as soon as that one organization gets a really good return on their investment, or people start to see, oh, this is kind of a cash cow, yeah, we want in on that. And that's what happened with, you think about Super Bowl commercials, right? If you
Hmm.
look at historically how much it costs for 30 seconds compared to today, like that number has grown massively. And I think somebody somewhere just needs to give women's sports an opportunity. And I think that growth is certainly there.
So you brought up UConn and their dominating thing. Obviously, with Gino, they had the Jesus 11 years or whatever. Obviously, with like Brianna Stewart, Maya Moore, like all of those players. And I do feel like with his case in particular, maybe I do think it's a factor because he was coaching a women's team that he's not really seen as like one of the like greatest like overall coaches of all time. And then on the other side of that too, with UConn being so dominant, but like in other sports, especially like men's sports, when a team is that dominant, they're like talked about all the time, like, oh, who's gonna beat them? Like, who's that? Or like all that, like during like the late 2010, 2020s, like when LeBron James was always in the finals, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so great. But it's like Gino's winning his stuff, and it's just like, eh. And then in terms of nonprofit women's sports, who I've talked about, and shout out to Sarah Bogan, like a coach like KJ Kindler. like the Oklahoma women's gymnastics coach who, if you just took her name, the age old, made her name blank, picture blank, and then you just read this resume off like, oh, this coach is a 15-time Big 10, Big 12 coach of the years. He's like 6-time national champion. You're like, you would think, oh, that's great. And then you put her name on it, you're just like, oh, it's just women's gymnastics. Even though I think those coaches really need to be celebrated and thrown into like the overall best coaches of all time. Is really just not Bill Belichick and like Nick Saban. There's a whole bunch of other coaches in women's sports who are considered.
Even, Stanford's women's basketball coach, she is the winningest coach
Mm-hmm.
in all of college basketball, and you still don't really hear her name brought up much.
Nope.
Um, and again, kind of to that point, same example, like if you were to look at her resume, you would think, yeah, this is somebody who is one of the greatest coaches ever, but then you know, see
The
that it's
picture and the name. Yeah.
yeah, and women's basketball and what she coaches, and then you're like, oh, that's not as impressive when in reality it obviously is. And to have that sustainability and be able to coach for as long as she has, like that's not
Mhm.
something that happens every day. And I think we're going to see that less and less over, you know, the course of the years, because there's so much emphasis on winning, and we just don't see kind of that long term and that longevity with coaches, because that pressure is so much higher than maybe what it used to be. The coaching carousel wasn't as much of a thing, back in the day.
Agree. I would also go back to like the Clark thing and all that. Now that people talk about, now that the worldwide leader talks about her more and sometimes brings her up on their number one show, like First Take and all this stuff. My only thing would be to you bring people every day to talk like NFL, NBA, sports scandal, and some of the topics. I mean, like I've talked about it with you. A lot of it's regurgitated. It really is. Like, I mean, I love Michael Jordan. I love LeBron James. I love Kobe Bryant. But I mean, I can regurgitate the same debates that have been said about like, oh, who's the greatest of all time and all this stuff. And even the NFL, the stuff is regurgitated now to the point where it's like, oh, is Patrick Mahomes going to be the next Tom Brady? Like, I would love for them to bring in like normal, like just talk like you talk about these sports every week. Women's college basketball does not only play the day Caitlin Clark scores 30 points. You can bring people in who cover the sport, get them some exposure, like, oh, how are the games? Like stuff like that. So I
No,
want to see that improvement.
I would agree, but I think that's the easy way out, right? So, there's been this push to talk about women's sports, and we can, on First Take, we can talk about Caitlin Clark, and then we've kind of checked that box for the day
Yep.
that we've talked about women's sports. And I think, somebody needs to come in and say, whoa, 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 to your point, right? We need to actually talk about something new or different, and actually have a conversation about women's sports, and not just what we see in the headlines constantly, with Caitlin Clark, and the things that are super easy because they're out there all the time.
Agreed. And they probably, and in all honesty, without you looking at their notes that they get from their intern people, they probably could not name another person on that Iowa team.
Yeah,
Like
probably
that's
not.
how much they don't pay attention to the thing and then only pay attention to, because that's who the ESPN brass decided. So last thing was actually a topic you put on. So for people who don't know, obviously Chelsea Heppert is a big Swiftie who went to the Taylor Swift concert. You heard her podcast. Chelsea Myers is a big Swiftie who also went to the Taylor Swift concert. Both of our Chelseas went to different states. I think Heppert went to Detroit and you went to
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati. So you stayed in state. That's great. But both are Swifties. So Mrs. Chelsea Myers had the last topic is about Taylor Swift. And I had to look up what even happened in this regard. And now I'm caught up, but this might be a rant from her. So go ahead and then I'll chime in.
It's a little bit of a rant, but I do want to be fully transparent. Yes, I am a Swiftie. I am a fan of hers. I've seen her in concert more than once. So, yes, there is a little bit of bias, but bias aside, I would have the same perspective if it were anybody else. So, we've seen Taylor, she's dating Travis Kelce. So, we've seen her at NFL games.
Hmm.
And, she's been in the media a lot. It was the year of Taylor Swift for sure.
Hmm.
And so, two really prominent people in the NFL, Brett Favre and Tony Dungy, have come out and basically said that Taylor Swift is the downfall of the NFL.
Okay.
Now, something
Oh.
you may not know about me is I'm also a Colts fan. So, Tony Dungy is somebody that I have admired. He obviously coached the Super Bowl winning Colts in
Hmm.
2000, the 2006 2007 season. And so have a large amount of respect for him as a coach. But this is something that I very much disagree with. I think, people are saying that she's being shown too much, that she's ruining the game of football. And, my response to that is it's not her, right? She has no control over when she is shown, how much she is shown. And so all these people that are coming out at her saying, she is the reason the NFL is declining is a load of BS. There are also people that are saying she's bad luck for the Chiefs, that she's the reason that they were losing games. Also, not true. She's not out on the field. She's just there to watch her boyfriend. Like a lot of other players have wives and girlfriends who are there to watch the game. She just happens to be one of the most famous people in the world, right? People want to see her. And let me tell you, the NFL has latched on to this. And so I think if anybody should be upset with anybody, I think it's people should be upset with the NFL. And, again, you can like her music, you cannot like her music, you can like her, you cannot like her. But I don't think she's the one to blame in all of this. Brett Favre also was one of those people that blamed, Taylor Swift for the Colts losing or the Chiefs losing, excuse me. He said that, their relationship is simply publicity, that it's a money grab for her. Let me make something very, very clear.
Well, that one did get debunked, by the way. That money grab one got debunked. He didn't say that part.
Taylor Swift is a billionaire, right? She makes more money than Travis Kelce does. So anybody who thinks that it is a cash grab is wildly off base, right? So that to me is just ridiculous. But I also think that Brett Favre should probably be focusing on not going to prison instead of what Taylor Swift is
Oh,
doing.
he's not going to prison. So
Well,
that
you
ain't
know,
happening.
it blows my mind. And again, like I am a fan of her, so I enjoy seeing her. If you know anything about Taylor Swift, this is the most her fans have seen her in a really long time. Her previous relationship she kept very private, and as somebody who, has kept tabs on her, listens to her music, I will say from my outside perspective, this is the happiest I have ever seen her. I act like I know her and I know what she's doing and all of these things, but like you can kind of see just,
Oh.
some of the experiences and the looks on her face, and it's really cool to see. And the thing that I think is even cooler is you are siphoning in a new set of fans, right? There are people who are watching football games that never would have watched a football game if it weren't for Taylor Swift. And I
Mhm.
think the NFL recognizes that and are latching on to that. So again, to my point, I think you need to be upset with the NFL and not with Taylor Swift, because they're not dumb, right? They know that Swifties are kind of insane, right? They're cult like, for lack of a better term, right? And any opportunity that they can get to see her, they're going to take advantage of it. I'll tell you, I've watched more Chiefs games this year than I have in a really long time, simply because I wanted to see Taylor Swift, and I will be the first to admit that. But to say she is disenchanting, as Tony Dungy said, or that she is to blame for losses and other things, I think that's just wildly inaccurate.
Anything else?
No, I just really think that that just needed to be said because there's so much going on social media and so much talk about her. And again, you cannot like her, that's fine. I will, you know, somewhat disrespectfully disagree with you. Because, at the end of the day, right? You may not like her music, but she is pretty talented. If you look at her music and her ability to write songs, it is a talent that I think is really unmatched. And again, even if you don't like her music, if you read some of her lyrics, and I'm not talking Shake It Off or 22 or some of those songs that if you look at things on like Folklore, Evermore, even some of her newer stuff on Midnights, like there is some real craft in what she does. And I think that should be at a minimum respected. Again, you don't have to like her, you don't have to listen to her music, but I think if you look at her career over the last, gosh, 20 years, that's incredible in and of itself. Not many artists can say that they've had that long of a career, and she just keeps kind of reinventing herself. And so I will be the first one to defend her to the end of time. But I just think that this whole NFL thing is blown out of proportion. She's there to watch a game, and she just happens to be shown a million times. And I will add, so I guess I wasn't done, but I will add, if you watch the Lions game, Eminem was shown a ton of times on that broadcast, and nobody on social media said a darn thing about it. And what's the difference? You can read between the lines. So I don't know why people are upset. Is the moral of this whole kind of spiel.
Okay. Man, I don't even know where to start. Well, I guess we'll start with the first thing. So, Tony, Coach Dungy, I guess I'll work my way from the beginning from what she said. So, the first thing you brought up was Tony about Taylor Swift being a distraction from the sport. And he's not the first person to say something like that. He won't be the last. And I would say, with your thing that you said about the NFL thing, I'm obvious. I am, well, it's not obvious. I'm not a Swiftie. There are obviously songs that I do like of Taylor Swift's, but like the only reason that I don't even say that my household owns any of the albums is because my wife buys them, or I make the playlist off of Apple Music for my wife. And if she's driving, that's what we're listening to, and I'm fine with it. There's some songs I'm like, oh, this is sketchy, but neither here nor there. I'm not like a super big defender of her like you, but I am objective. The first two games, the very first two, where the NFL, and you're right, she has no control over any of this stuff. The NFL was doing it way too hard. I think it was the second game where they had her cleaning up the suite. That was too much. Even that pissed me off. And it's a thing with human emotion where it's like, she's not the one doing it, but since that's the person you're looking at, you get pissed at her. So even I was guilty of that the first two games. I'm like, what the hell are we doing? As it's died down, obviously, like when they show her now, I'm just like, all right, it's normal. They don't show her as much as they used to, which I think is fine. They need to treat it like, I know Jason said this on his pod. They need to treat it like the NBA games. Celebrities go to games all the time. You show them a couple times, then that's it. So I don't blame her for the stuff anymore, especially now that like back then the first two games, since I am not, again, disclaimer, I'm not a Swiftie. I didn't know if they were dating for real or not. So, but now that they're just dating, I'm like, oh, unless she's coming to support her boyfriend, that's perfectly fine. I know on a different subject for a different day, I know the one game where you were just like, and when she did a little handshake thing with Jackson Mahomes, but that's a whole different conversation for a different day. So that is the NFL's doing. I also think they know exactly what they're doing with that Swift fan base. Because for anyone who doesn't think that's the reason that that game was on freaking Peacock, that is the reason that game was on Peacock. Because Swifty fans are going to pay the $5.99 to see her. Which she did come in a very nice Travis. I actually did like that jacket. I do feel like I just don't feel like any of it is her fault at all. I feel like it's the NFL and other media's fault that entice and anger people. Like a couple of days ago, FanDuel said if the Chiefs win a Super Bowl, should Taylor Swift get a Super Bowl ring? Like saying stupid stuff like that. Like you're just bringing anger to the woman for no reason. And I feel like relationship wise, Travis has become more liked because he's dating Taylor Swift because of Swifties, but Taylor has become more hated because she's dating Travis Kelce, and like the football people are saying that's dumb. But I think Tony was wrong there. Now, who was next? Mr. Favre.
Can I
So,
add something really quickly?
oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that about Travis Kelce becoming more liked and Taylor Swift becoming more hated.
Mhm.
If you look at the conversation around Travis Kelce going down to Argentina and watching her perform, like it's all positive, right?
Yep.
He's a great boyfriend. He's, supporting his girl. Like, he very clearly is smitten.
Hmm.
And so it's all positive. And yet Taylor Swift turns around and does the same thing, and it's all negative. And so, again, I think it's important when you're looking at these things and you're seeing this discourse, you think critically about, okay, why is this happening? Why are people having such an emotional reaction to this one way or another? And I think, Taylor Swift is easy to hate, right? She's successful. She, writes all of her own music. She, is grossing an obscene amount of money. And so it's really easy to just say she's a horrible human being. And yet, if you read any articles or hear people talk about her, that's very much not the experience that people have with her. So I just think it's interesting to see kind of that difference in the way that people, are talking about her support versus his support of her.
Yeah, I don't know how people can call her a horrible, like, because again, I don't know her personally, so I don't know how you can call her a horrible human being. Like, if you, again, like you've already said, if you don't like her music, that is fine. But like a horrible human being because she's going to support the games. And again, this is coming from someone, the first two games, it was really, I'm like, what the hell are we doing? But then, like, once you get the anger out, you're just like, well, she's not the one with the camera literally putting it on her. So I think people need to realize that fact. So then Mr. Favre, like I said, he ain't going to prison. That's not happening. But that's a neither here nor there. His thing, the first with the will be blamed if the Chiefs lose. So I saw that thing. It was basically saying that Chiefs fans will make her or NFL fans will make her a scapegoat, which unfortunately I do actually think that there are going to be people who do that. I mean, it's kind of crazy coming from Brett Favre because, like you said, he's going through his own problems that he needs to deal with. But I think with that, I think people need to think like this isn't middle school where a guy is trying to impress a girl and then he doesn't catch a pass because the girl's right there in the middle school stands. These are grown-ups, these are professionals. Like you said, Travis is the one playing. She's up there watching the games. Now, are there situations where a relationship impacts your play? Absolutely. Domestic abuse relationships, like all of that at death, like all that stuff. But this is from the outside looking in. I don't know. You have the secret deeds on them. It looks like a healthy relationship. So it's like she has no impact on the game that they're playing. Now, if you're saying it just to make like, oh, to make fun, it's just like, all right. But like, if you think that's actually a serious thing, it's not. The Chiefs just aren't good. And by the way, they're going home this weekend to the Bills. But yeah, so fans just make scapegoats out of everything. When my team loses, I think it's because I put the wrong socks on. Like it's just, but to make it, but that's like fun fan stuff. To single out one individual, that's a little much. Even if you don't like her music. All right, who was next? Oh, the Eminem one. So the only thing I would say with Mr. Marshall Matters about that one is obviously he did the open for the game, and he's a lifelong Detroiter. And for him, like you talk about Taylor being like in public, Eminem is really never in public. So that'd be the only thing. I do get your point. I really do. But that's just like, well, he did do the open, all that stuff. His open was funny, asking Matt Stafford to blow the game just because of all the years. But I get it with the showing them of all that. My thing is that if we are going, if the NFL is going to that route, and obviously if the significant others and people, if we're going to appreciate the greatness and all that stuff, I know they've done it recently, but it's like, hell, people, another GOAT type level person, Simone Biles is at Packer games, like show her and the crew, like let's just, I mean, if we're just gonna do it,
No,
let's
I
do it.
agree. And there's been a lot of talk about that on, social media as well, as why aren't they focusing on Simone Biles too? And, you can speculate about what that reason is, but no, I wholeheartedly agree. I think if you're going to do it for one, you need to be consistent and show families or whoever, and then it doesn't make it as much of a big deal. But at the end of the day, right, if Taylor Swift is at an event, you're gonna show her. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna make sure people know that she's there because it's a huge deal. She
I actually
obviously
didn't think
had
she was
an,
gonna go to that game. It was cold. She
yeah,
did
I
give a
mean,
great meme. That meme is great.
yeah, she's had an incredible year, and
Hmm.
in the past, I don't think we would have seen her. I think this is just something that's been very new in recent years, and I think people appreciate that from a fan perspective. And again, this is, I think, from a fan perspective, the happiest that we Swifties have seen her, and I think that's refreshing for us. But yeah, I think the NFL has certainly taken it too far at times, but again, they knew what they were doing,
Oh yeah.
and I think it was smart marketing, and my students and I talked about this for a long time, and to your point, and I understand the frustration the first two games. Yeah, it was a lot, and even my students were like, okay, we're over it, and
It
people
was
were
the
like,
trash. It was her picking up the trash. We that was
yeah.
unnecessary.
And they're like, we're over talking about them. And I think the NFL kind of started to realize that, but they
Hmm.
also want to keep that fan base interested. And so that's kind of they're trying to find that balance. But their next step is partnering with Kristen Juszczyk, and finding a way to get good merchandise created for women, because it's not great, and it's not what women want. And you saw the reaction to her jacket, and
It's a good
you know
jacket.
yeah, I mean, Kristen's Instagram has she's gained over 500,000 followers in a matter of days because of what she created, and that's the Taylor Swift effect. And so I think the NFL would be smart to find a way to partner with her and figure out how they can continue to grow and cater to the female fan base um, that's there now. I mean, obviously there have been fans there before, but I think they're starting to realize from a marketing perspective that, oh, yeah, like these people are here and they spend money just like men do, and how do we keep them, you know,
Oh.
engaged and part of the NFL brand, and to buy tickets and all of that stuff. And I think this has really shown that there's opportunity for that. The NFL just again needs to take it, as we've kind of talked about in other instances.
Oh yeah. I mean the NFL and I mean they don't care about anyone, anything, any fan. They care about one thing only, and that's generating income. And
Yeah.
they will do whatever it takes to generate more and more income. It could be being fake on issues that are important, like, oh, we care about this and this, which you probably do not. But as long as it involves getting money, they will do it. My thing with 2024 now is how different things of the past would have been with all the social media and stuff like that. Like, obviously, Taylor is one of the most recognizable people in the world. Another very recognizable person in the world is someone like Kim Kardashian. Like if we would have brought when Reggie and Kim Kardashian were dating in New Orleans almost 15 something years ago and brought that to 2024 and they won the Super Bowl too, would they have shown like Kim that much? Like it's just interesting thinking like with the advent of social media, like if you would have brought because these people aren't the only Taylor's not obviously the only celebrity who's dated someone who's she's more famous than like even '07 when Jessica Simpson was with Tony Romo. I mean, they did show like Jessica a good amount of times, but it wasn't amplified in the way because there was no Twitter, there was no Snapchat, there was no Instagram. So it's just like I would have loved to seen how the NFL would have covered those high prominent relationships from the past, like now.
Well, and I think you might have an opportunity for that with Kim Kardashian since Skims became the official underwear apparel of the NBA.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like this past year. So maybe that is, something that I don't know how often Kim Kardashian goes to NBA games, but maybe more frequently now that she has that partnership. And maybe that's part of, their contractual agreement. I have no idea because that wouldn't surprise me if that was part of their agreement. But, I think that, yeah, certainly it's a question of, you know, what would have happened, in previous years, or does it just so happen to be Taylor because she's kind of the it girl, right now? Would it matter if it's somebody else in 2 years? Will she receive the same kind of reaction, or is it just because of Taylor Swift? I don't know. But yeah, I don't think this is the first time that something like this is gonna, or I don't think this is the first time, and I certainly don't think it's gonna be the last time that something like this happens. But I think it's incredibly amplified right now, just given the status of Taylor Swift and everything that she's done over the course of the year with her tour and everything else. She's just somebody that people want to talk about. And,
Mhm.
this kind of just came out of nowhere, so to speak. And you see these things happen, and you latch on and you ride the wave as long as you possibly can. And it'll be interesting to see what the NFL does next year or how this is approached next year, assuming that they stay together that long. Who knows? Obviously, they're human beings and relationships don't always work
Mhm.
out, so they might not. But, I think there's a lot of promise. But it'll be interesting to see how that's handled moving forward because it's not new. It won't be new anymore at that point. It'll be kind of status quo. But again, I think the NFL knows that if they continue to kind of toe that line, they're going to get the viewership because Swifties want to catch a glimpse.
Yeah. And like you said, next year, because they're going home this weekend from a sports related. They're going home.
The better question is Taylor going to Buffalo?
I don't know. Kansas City was cool. Well, Buffalo, that's a whole different. I
I saw that it's supposed to be like -3 degrees in Buffalo this weekend, so
mean,
we'll
this.
see. And they're supposed to get another 2 feet of snow in the next couple of days.
Well,
So
she better go because it's the last time she's seen her boyfriend play this year. So
yeah,
the Bills just have to win. I mean, because all the pressure is on them. So that's why they're going home. So for the people who are gonna, we talked about the U.S. women's team about when they lost. I already know when Kansas City loses. Those tweets are going to be like, Patrick Mahomes lost the first time ever to Josh Allen in the playoffs. What's the only difference? Taylor Swift is there. I already know that tweet is pre-written in so
oh,
many people's drafts. Like,
it's not that Tyreek Hill left or they lost
no,
any of their weapons or
nope.
they have no receiving core, but let's blame.
I already know. It's in draft. It's in draft for millions
Oh,
of people right now. But gosh, I've even come around just like she's. I mean, after the first two games, it was fine. It's just like she's just there supporting her
yeah.
guy. Now, if I found
And
out if I found out there was some shady operation that she was paying like the camera person in like in an alternate universe, then I'd be pissed. But that's not real. So anything else?
no, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, yeah, there was a lot starting from the U.S. women, the sports going up, champions, NCAA still being the NCAA, and Swift. But yeah, with that being said, thank you, Chelsea, for coming back to the podcast. Like the Captain Byron said, your fans probably missed you a whole lot because you cover a whole bunch of things in the women's sports genre. And thank you, everyone, for listening. If the Chiefs do win this Sunday, which I don't know how, obviously they're going to ride this wave. If the script writers were real, they would obviously want Taylor at the Super Bowl if the script writing thing was real. But with that being said, thank you everyone for listening to the L7C podcast. Signing out. thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.